The name on my phone screen made my heart stop. Marcus Carter. I hadn't seen that name in 4 years, hadn't heard his voice in longer than that. We communicated through lawyers now, when we communicated at all, and there was nothing left between us that required direct contact. I stared at the phone, watching it ring, my finger hovering over the decline button. My office was quiet, the afternoon light streaming through windows that overlooked the Atlanta skyline. On the wall behind me hung my medical degree, my board certifications, the awards I had earned in a career I had built from nothing. None of it would exist if Marcus Carter had been a different kind of man. The phone stopped ringing, then started again. Marcus Carter, persistent for once in his life. I answered. Camille. His voice was older, wearier, stripped of the confident charm that had first attracted me to him. Thank you for picking up. What do you want, Marcus? I need to talk to you, in person. It's about the family. We're in trouble, Camille. Real trouble. I almost laughed. The Carter family, in trouble. The Carters with their real estate empire, their country club memberships, their generational wealth that had made me feel like a beggar at a banquet throughout my entire marriage. That sounds like a family matter, I said. I'm not family, remember? Your mother made that very clear. The silence on the other end was heavy with memories we both wished we could forget. But I remembered everything. Every slight, every exclusion, every moment when Marcus had chosen his mother's comfort over his wife's dignity. And I remembered, most of all, the photograph. The wedding had been everything Dolores Carter wanted it to be. 300 guests, a reception at the country club where Reginald Carter had been a founding member, flowers imported from Holland, a cake that cost more than I had earned in a year as an ICU nurse. I had felt like a prop in someone else's production, a necessary but unwelcome accessory to the display of Carter wealth and status. I was 26 years old, an orphan since 16, alone in the world except for the man I was marrying. My parents had died in a car accident while I was still in high school. My grandmother, who had raised me through the grief, had passed away when I was 20, leaving me with nothing but a determination to make something of myself and a longing for belonging that would eventually lead me into a trap I didn't recognize until it was too late. Marcus Carter had seemed like an answer to every prayer I'd ever whispered. Handsome, successful, attentive. He had pursued me with a dedication that felt like devotion. When he proposed, I thought I was finally going to have what I had lost. A family. A place where I belonged. I didn't understand then that belonging was a privilege the Carters granted selectively, and that Dolores would never grant it to me. She's just protective, Marcus had said when his mother's early coldness became impossible to ignore. She'll warm up once she gets to know you. She never warmed up. She never intended to. From the moment Marcus introduced me as his girlfriend, Dolores Carter had seen me as an interloper, an obstacle to be removed, a stain on the family portrait she was carefully composing. The wedding day was her masterpiece of subtle cruelty. The ceremony itself was beautiful. I will grant her that. The vows were spoken, the rings exchanged, the kiss witnessed by 300 guests who saw nothing wrong. But after the ceremony, as the photographer arranged us for the formal portraits, Dolores revealed her true intentions. Now let's get the family photo, the photographer said, consulting his shot list. All the Carters together, please. I moved to stand beside Marcus, assuming my place as his wife, as a Carter by marriage if not by birth. Dolores's hand on my arm stopped me. Oh, Camille, dear, this is the Carter family photo. Her voice was sugar over steel. You understand, just blood relatives. You can wait over there. She pointed to a spot near the buffet table, where the waitstaff was preparing for the reception, where the hired help gathered between tasks. I looked at Marcus, waiting for him to intervene, waiting for my husband of 20 minutes, to tell his mother that I was family now, that I belonged in the photograph, that excluding me from my own wedding portrait was unacceptable. He looked at his shoes. It'll just take a minute, he mumbled. We can take a separate photo after. I stood there, in my wedding dress, in front of 300 witnesses, and understood that I had made a terrible mistake. The man I had married was not my protector. He was his mother's puppet, and I was not important enough to warrant the effort of cutting the strings. I walked to the spot near the buffet table and waited while the photographer captured the Carter family. Dolores at the center, resplendent in mother-of-the-groom elegance, flanked by her 3 children, Marcus, Vanessa, and Gregory, and surrounded by extended relatives who had been welcomed into the portrait that I was excluded from. No one said anything. No one protested on my behalf. A few guests exchanged uncomfortable glances, but no one spoke up. The Carters were too powerful, too connected, too dangerous to challenge. When the photo was done, I smiled and pretended nothing had happened. I accepted congratulations and danced at my reception and played the role of happy bride. But something had broken inside me, cracked along fault lines I hadn't known existed. That night, in the honeymoon suite of the hotel where we were staying before our flight to the Caribbean, I confronted Marcus. Your mother excluded me from the family photo, at our wedding, and you let her. He sighed, loosening his tie, already tired of the conversation. Camille, you're making too much of this. It's just a photo. We'll take plenty of photos together over the years. It's not just a photo, it's a statement. She was telling everyone there that I'm not part of your family. You're overreacting. That's just how she is. She's old-fashioned. She'll come around. And if she doesn't? Marcus finally met my eyes, and I saw something that chilled me. Acceptance. He had accepted that his mother would never embrace me, and he had decided that this was something I would simply have to live with. Then you'll learn to deal with it, he said. The way I've learned to deal with her. She's my mother, Camille. I can't change who she is. I lay awake that night while my new husband slept beside me, understanding with terrible clarity that I had traded one form of loneliness for another. As an orphan, I had been alone in the world. As Marcus Carter's wife, I would be alone within a family that had already decided I didn't belong. But I also understood something else, something that would sustain me through the years ahead. I would not be trapped forever. I would find a way out. I would build something of my own, something no one could take from me. I opened my phone and began researching medical school requirements. If the Carters wouldn't give me a family, I would create my own. And I would make damn sure that I never needed them for anything ever again. Camille, are you still there? Marcus's voice pulled me back to the present, to my office with its skyline view, to the life I had built in the 12 years since that humiliating moment. I'm here. Please, I know I don't have any right to ask, but please meet with us. Just hear what we have to say. Why should I? The silence stretched. When Marcus spoke again, his voice was small, defeated. Because I was wrong. About everything. And because my mother is about to lose everything. And I think maybe you're the only person who can help. I thought about the photo on Dolores Carter's wall, the one that didn't include me. I thought about 8 years of marriage to a man who never once chose me over his mother's approval. I thought about the countless times I had been made to feel like an outsider in what should have been my own home. Then I thought about who I was now. Dr. Camille Washington, cardiologist, clinic founder, a woman who had transformed her pain into purpose. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to watch the Carters suffer. But maybe, just maybe, I needed closure. Fine, I said. I'll meet with you, but I'm not promising anything. Thank you, Camille. Thank you. I hung up without saying goodbye and turned to look out my window at the city where I had rebuilt my life. Tomorrow, I would face the family that had rejected me, and this time, I would face them as an equal. Actually, no, not as an equal, as someone they needed. And that, as it turned out, made all the difference. That evening, I went home to the apartment I had bought with money I earned myself, decorated with art I had chosen, filled with silence that felt like peace rather than loneliness. It was a far cry from the Carter mansion, where I had spent 8 years trying to shrink myself small enough to fit into spaces that were never meant for me. I poured a glass of wine and sat by the window, watching the sun set over Atlanta, thinking about the woman I had been on my wedding day. So young, so desperate to belong, so willing to accept crumbs from a family that should have welcomed me with open arms. I had loved Marcus once, or I had loved the idea of him, the handsome lawyer who pursued me with flowers and poetry, who looked at me like I was precious, who promised me a family when I had none. What I hadn't understood was that his devotion was conditional, his courage non-existent, his love always subordinate to his fear of disappointing his mother. The marriage had been doomed from that first photograph, but I hadn't had the resources to leave, hadn't had anywhere to go, hadn't had the confidence to believe I could make it on my own. So I had stayed, and I had survived, and I had used every moment of my suffering to fuel the fire that would eventually set me free. My phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa Carter, the only member of that family I still spoke to voluntarily. "Heard you're meeting with them tomorrow. Are you okay?" I smiled despite myself. Vanessa had been the exception to the Carter rule, the one person in that household who had treated me like a human being rather than an interloper. She had apologized repeatedly for her mother's behavior, had defended me when she could, had maintained contact after the divorce when everyone else in the family was happy to forget I existed. "I'm fine," I typed back. "Just processing. You don't have to do this, you know. You don't owe them anything." "I know, but maybe I owe myself some closure. If it helps, Mother is absolutely devastated about having to ask you for help. She's been saying for weeks that she'd rather lose everything than admit she was wrong about you. And yet here we are. Pride is a luxury she can no longer afford." Vanessa added a heart emoji. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I'm proud of you. You became everything she said you'd never be. That's the best revenge possible." I set down my phone and thought about revenge. I had fantasized about it in the early years, imagined scenarios where the Carters would be forced to acknowledge their treatment of me, where Dolores would have to eat her cruel words. But somewhere along the way, the fantasies had faded, replaced by something more sustainable: indifference. I didn't need revenge. I had built a life that spoke for itself. The Carters' current troubles were not my doing, and their resolution was not my responsibility. I would meet with them because I chose to, not because I needed anything from them. That was the real victory, I realized. Not that they had fallen while I rose, but that I no longer cared either way. They had been the center of my world for 8 painful years. Now they were just people I used to know. I finished my wine and went to bed, sleeping peacefully for the first time since Marcus's name had appeared on my phone. Tomorrow, I would face the past. And then, finally, I would let it go. The 8 years of my marriage to Marcus Carter were a masterclass in endurance. I learned to smile through insults, to absorb humiliation without reaction, to exist in a space where I was constantly reminded that I didn't belong. It was exhausting, degrading work, but it was also preparation for what would come after. The exclusion from the wedding photo was only the beginning. Over the years, Dolores Carter found countless ways to remind me of my outsider status. Family holidays where my place at the table was somehow always the worst seat. Birthday celebrations where my gifts were opened with barely concealed disappointment. Photographs, always more photographs, where I was positioned at the edge, or asked to hold the camera for this one, dear, or simply not invited to be present. And through it all, Marcus said nothing, did nothing. My husband, my supposed partner and protector, watched his mother systematically humiliate his wife and never once intervened. "You have to understand," he would say whenever I complained. "That's just how she is. She's set in her ways. It's easier to work around her than to fight." Easier for whom? Not for me. But Marcus had long since chosen the path of least resistance, and that path led through me rather than around his mother. I could have left. I thought about it constantly, especially in the first few years. But leaving required resources I didn't have. I had married Marcus directly from my modest nursing salary, with no savings, no property, no safety net. The Carter prenuptial agreement, which Dolores had insisted upon, would leave me with nothing if I divorced. I would be back where I started, alone, broke, invisible. So I decided to play the long game. It started with research. Late at night, while Marcus slept or stayed late at the office, I suspected affairs but couldn't prove them and found I didn't care. I studied for the MCAT. I had been a good student in nursing school, but medical school was a different level entirely. The test was brutal, the competition fierce, the odds of acceptance slim for someone my age with my background. But I had one thing that many of my younger competitors lacked: desperation. I needed this. It wasn't just a career goal, it was my escape route. Every night of studying was another brick in the wall I was building between myself and the Carters. I told no one what I was doing. Not Marcus, certainly, who would have dismissed the idea as impractical. Not Dolores, who would have mocked me. Not even Vanessa, who might have been supportive but might also have let something slip. This secret was mine alone. When I took the MCAT, I told Marcus I was visiting a college friend. When I received my score, comfortably above the median for admitted students, I cried alone in a coffee shop bathroom, overwhelmed by the realization that my escape might actually be possible. The applications came next, carefully prepared during lunch breaks and late nights, hidden from a husband who had stopped paying attention to what I did. I applied to 12 medical schools, knowing that my age and non-traditional background would work against me, hoping that my scores and essay I wrote about the importance of compassionate care for vulnerable populations would work in my favor. The acceptance letter arrived on a Tuesday, slipped in among the bills and catalogs that accumulated in the Carter mailbox. The Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, one of the best programs in the country. They wanted me. I held the letter in my trembling hands and felt something I hadn't experienced in years: hope. Telling Marcus was a tactical decision, not an emotional one. I had long since stopped seeking his approval or expecting his support. I told him because I needed him to know that things were changing, that his complacent assumption of my permanent presence was about to be disrupted. Medical school? He looked up from his phone, actually paying attention for once. You want to become a doctor? At your age? I've already been accepted. Johns Hopkins. I start in the fall. The shock on his face would have been satisfying if I still cared about his opinion. When did this happen? You never said anything. I've been preparing for 2 years, while you were doing whatever you do when you're not here. The accusation landed, though he didn't acknowledge it. Marcus was skilled at deflecting uncomfortable truths. What does this mean for us? It means I'll be in Baltimore for 4 years. After that, residency, which could be anywhere. I met his eyes, willing him to understand what I wasn't quite saying. This is happening, Marcus, with or without your support. He was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then, have you told my mother? I almost laughed. Of course that was his concern. Not what this meant for me, for my career, for my happiness. What would Dolores think? I thought I'd let you handle that. The conversation that followed was predictable. Dolores was appalled. She thinks she can just abandon her responsibilities? After everything we've done for her? And Marcus was, as always, caught between us, choosing his mother's side by failing to choose mine. But it didn't matter anymore. I had my acceptance letter. I had my escape plan. I had 4 years of medical school ahead of me, then 3 years of residency, and somewhere at the end of that long tunnel was a life where I needed nothing from the Carters, and they had no power over me. I packed my bags and left for Baltimore, not certain if I was leaving a marriage or simply pausing one, not particularly caring either way. Medical school was the hardest thing I had ever done. The coursework was brutal, the hours endless, the pressure relentless. I was older than most of my classmates, less certain of the science than the students fresh from undergraduate degrees, more exhausted from juggling a marriage that existed only on paper. But I was also more motivated than anyone else in my class. Every late night in the library was a step away from the Carter family. Every exam passed was proof that I was more than the unwanted interloper Dolores had labeled me. Every patient I learned to care for was a reminder that my purpose was bigger than the small world of Atlanta high society. Marcus and I spoke occasionally, perfunctory calls that maintained the fiction of our marriage, without requiring either of us to invest in it. I learned later that he had multiple affairs during those years, casual relationships with women who asked nothing of him and expected even less. I should have been hurt, but I was too busy becoming a doctor to care. The divorce conversation happened during my 3rd year, when I was deep into clinical rotations and finally confident that I would actually make it through. I flew home for a long weekend, Christmas ostensibly, though I had stopped celebrating holidays at the Carter mansion years ago. "I want a divorce," I said, sitting across from Marcus in the living room of the house that had never felt like mine. "I think we both know this marriage has been over for a long time." He didn't argue. I think he was relieved, honestly. Divorcing me was the one decision he could make without his mother's interference, or rather, with her enthusiastic blessing. The proceedings were quick and clinical. The prenup meant I left with nothing except my education, my dignity, and my freedom. Dolores was publicly gracious about the split, privately triumphant. She was never right for this family, I heard her tell a friend at the country club. An orphan with no background, no breeding. Thank God Marcus finally came to his senses. I was standing close enough to hear, close enough for her to know I could hear. She wanted me to hear. One final humiliation, one last reminder that I had never been good enough. I smiled, thanked her for her hospitality over the years, and walked out of the Carter mansion for the last time. The years that followed were a blur of work and growth, and the gradual realization that I had been carrying a weight I didn't recognize until I set it down. Free from the Carters, free from the constant reminder that I didn't belong, I discovered something unexpected. I was happy. Residency at Johns Hopkins was grueling, but it was grueling in ways that made sense. The exhaustion came from saving lives, from mastering complex procedures, from becoming the physician I had dreamed of being. It was honest exhaustion, earned exhaustion, nothing like the soul-deep fatigue of trying to please people who had decided to hate me before I ever opened my mouth. I specialized in cardiology, drawn to the heart's mysteries, to the mechanical precision of interventions that could bring people back from the brink of death. My attendings noticed my dedication and began to mentor me more closely. Doors opened that I hadn't known existed. When fellowship offers arrived, I had my pick of programs. I chose Emory, wanting to return to Atlanta, wanting to prove something to the city where I had been dismissed and diminished. The girl Dolores Carter had called an orphan with no background was coming home as a cardiologist from one of the best training programs in the country. The irony was delicious, but I tried not to dwell on it. The Carters were my past. My future was about the patients I would serve, the community I would build, the legacy I would create. Still, I would be lying if I said I didn't smile when I saw Dolores at a charity gala during my first year back. She was holding court as always, surrounded by admirers, wearing a dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She saw me across the room and her face went rigid with recognition. I raised my glass to her and turned away. I had nothing to say to Dolores Carter, and she had nothing I wanted. Vanessa sought me out later that evening, hugging me with genuine warmth. "You look amazing," she said. "Successful and happy. Exactly like I always knew you would be." "How's the family?" I asked, mostly to be polite. "A mess, honestly." Vanessa lowered her voice. "Gregory is making terrible investment decisions with company money. Marcus married Portia Whitmore, remember her? And they're already having problems, and Mother is running out of people to blame for her troubles." "I'm sorry to hear that." "Are you?" Vanessa smiled knowingly. "I wouldn't blame you if you weren't. After everything they put you through." I considered the question honestly. Was I sorry to hear about the Carters' troubles? The answer was complicated. I didn't wish them harm. That would have required caring about them more than I did. But I also felt no sympathy for problems that seemed to stem from the same arrogance and entitlement that had made my years as Marcus's wife so miserable. "I'm indifferent," I said finally, "which I think is the healthiest thing I can be." Vanessa laughed. "That's probably true. Indifference is a form of freedom." It was. And freedom, I was learning, was the greatest gift I had ever given myself. The clinic came next, born from a desire to serve communities like the one I had grown up in. Communities where people worked multiple jobs and still couldn't afford adequate health care, where preventive care was a luxury and emergency rooms were the only option. I started small, with a single location in a neighborhood that other physicians avoided. The hours were long, the compensation minimal, the challenges endless. But the gratitude of my patients, the knowledge that I was making a real difference in real lives, was worth more than any salary. Word spread. Donations came in. I hired staff, expanded services, opened a second location. The local media picked up the story of the cardiologist who had left a prestigious hospital position to serve the underserved. The attention brought more resources, more volunteers, more opportunity to grow. By the time Marcus called me, 12 years after our wedding, I had 3 clinics serving thousands of patients, a national reputation for innovative community health programs, and a peace of mind that had once seemed impossible. The girl from the wedding photo, the one standing by the buffet table while the real family posed, no longer existed. In her place was a woman who had built something meaningful, something lasting, something that no Carter could ever take away. And now they were calling to ask for help. The irony was not lost on me. But as I prepared for the meeting, I realized I wasn't approaching it with vengeance or satisfaction. I was approaching it with something more powerful, the secure knowledge that whatever happened in that room, I would walk out with my dignity intact. They had taken so much from me during those years. They would not take anything more. The years between my divorce and Marcus's phone call were the most fulfilling of my life. I was building something meaningful, living on my own terms, becoming the woman I should have been all along. The ghost of the Carter marriage faded into memory, a painful chapter that had ultimately led to better things. The clinic grew beyond my original vision. What had started as a single location in an underserved neighborhood became a network of community health centers, each one staffed by physicians who shared my commitment to accessible care. We offered sliding scale fees, preventive health programs, mental health services, and specialty care that patients would otherwise have to travel hours to access. The recognition came gradually, then all at once. A profile in Atlanta magazine, an invitation to speak at a medical conference, a feature on local news about innovative healthcare models. Each bit of attention brought more resources, more volunteers, more opportunity to expand. I was interviewed for a national medical journal about my approach to community cardiology, and the article was picked up by mainstream media. Suddenly, I was being invited to speak at conferences across the country, to consult with other cities trying to replicate our model, to advise philanthropists on where their healthcare dollars would have the most impact. All of this happened while the Carter family's fortune was quietly collapsing. I learned the details from Vanessa, who had remained my friend and ally throughout the years. The Carter real estate empire, built by Marcus's father over decades, was being systematically destroyed by a combination of market forces and family dysfunction. Gregory, the youngest Carter sibling, had convinced Dolores to let him manage a significant portion of the family's investment portfolio. His choices were disastrous: speculative developments in markets that crashed, partnerships with developers who turned out to be fraudulent, leveraged bets that multiplied losses instead of gains. Within 5 years, he had burned through a quarter of the family's liquid assets. Meanwhile, Dolores's core business, the real estate development company that Reginald had founded, was struggling against changing market conditions. New competitors with better technology and more aggressive strategies were winning contracts that had once been assured. The company was bleeding money, kept alive only by selling off properties that should have been held for future generations. Mother refuses to adapt, Vanessa told me over coffee one afternoon. She's running the company like it's still 1985. Meanwhile, Gregory keeps making terrible decisions that she won't override because he's her baby. And Marcus is too passive to challenge either of them. Where is Marcus in all this? Divorced from Portia, that lasted all of 3 years, and working at the company. Not that he's doing much. He shows up, attends meetings, and defers to Mother on everything, just like he always did. I felt a flicker of something that might have been pity. Marcus had never been cruel in the way Dolores was cruel. He was simply weak, incapable of standing against his mother even when he knew she was wrong. It was a pathetic kind of failure, the inability to be anything other than what his mother had made him. "What about you?" I asked Vanessa. "You could take over, run things properly." She shook her head. "I tried. Mother won't hear of it. She says Gregory understands business better than I do because he's aggressive. Meanwhile, I'm just a doctor. What would I know about real estate?" The irony was bitter. Vanessa, the only competent Carter, was dismissed because she was a woman with expertise outside her mother's chosen field. Gregory, who had lost millions through incompetence, was protected because he was the favorite son. "The company is going to fail," Vanessa continued. "Within a year, maybe 2. And when it does, Mother is going to need a scapegoat. She always needs someone to blame. And you think that will be you?" "I think that will be anyone except Gregory." Vanessa smiled sadly. "But that's not why I'm telling you this. I'm telling you because Marcus is going to call you eventually. Mother is going to swallow her pride and ask you for help. She's already mentioned your name. That girl Marcus married. As if she didn't spend years trying to destroy you. Why would she think I would help? Because she's desperate. And because she believes in her heart that everyone can be bought or manipulated. She doesn't understand people who operate on principle." I thought about this conversation in the weeks that followed, as my own success continued to grow and the Carters' decline accelerated. The contrast was stark. The family that had rejected me was falling apart, while the orphan they had dismissed was building something lasting. But I took no pleasure in their suffering. That was what surprised me most. I had expected to feel vindicated, triumphant, finally proven right in my assessment of my own worth. Instead, I felt mostly sad. Sad for the waste of potential, sad for the damage that pride and cruelty had caused, sad for Marcus, who had never learned to be anything more than his mother's instrument. When his call finally came, I wasn't surprised. I was just tired. The meeting was scheduled for a Sunday afternoon at the Carter mansion, though Vanessa had warned me that mansion might be a generous term for a property that was now mortgaged to its maximum value. I drove through the gates that had once intimidated me and parked in a circular drive that needed maintenance, in front of a house that showed visible signs of deferred upkeep. 12 years ago, I had walked into this house as a nervous bride, hoping to be accepted, terrified of rejection. Now I walked in as a successful physician and philanthropist, invited because the family that had excluded me needed something I could provide. Marcus met me at the door, older and grayer than I remembered, with the stooped posture of a defeated man. Behind him lurked Gregory, who had the nervous energy of someone who knew he was responsible for a disaster but hoped to avoid consequences. And seated in the living room, in a chair positioned to dominate the space, was Dolores Carter. She had aged poorly. The elegant matriarch I remembered had become a bitter old woman, her face lined with the sourness of expectations unmet. She looked at me with an expression that mixed desperation with residual contempt. She needed my help, but she still couldn't quite bring herself to respect me. "Camille." She didn't stand. "Thank you for coming. Mrs. Carter." I remained standing, forcing her to look up at me. A small power move, but after years of being made to feel small, it felt necessary. "Please, sit." She gestured to a chair that was obviously lower than her own, another positioning tactic. I ignored the chair and chose the sofa instead, settling at eye level. "You said you needed to talk about something important." Dolores's jaw tightened at my directness. She had expected pleasantries, the social lubricant that would allow her to ease into her request. I had no intention of making this easy. "The family is facing some challenges," she began. "Your company is failing because Gregory made catastrophic investment decisions. Your properties are mortgaged beyond their value, and you have perhaps 18 months before you lose everything." I kept my voice neutral, stating facts rather than accusations. Vanessa filled me in. The shock on Dolores's face was almost worth the years of mistreatment. She had expected me to be uninformed, to require her version of events. Instead, I had arrived with full knowledge of her situation. I see. Well, then you understand why we're reaching out. I understand that you're desperate. What I don't understand is why you think I would help. Because you were family. I was never family. The words came out sharper than I intended. You made that very clear, Mrs. Carter. From the moment I married your son, you made sure I knew I didn't belong. The photograph at my own wedding, the exclusion from holidays and celebrations, the constant reminders that I was an outsider, tolerated but never accepted. The room was silent. Marcus looked at his shoes, the same gesture he had made 12 years ago when his mother kicked me out of our wedding photo. Some things apparently never changed. That was, Dolores faltered. That was a long time ago. People change. Have you changed, Mrs. Carter? Do you believe now that I was worthy of your son? Do you regret the way you treated me? Another long silence. Dolores could not bring herself to say the words, to admit that she had been wrong. Even facing financial ruin, her pride was still stronger than her wisdom. I see. I stood, preparing to leave. Then I don't think we have anything to discuss. Wait. Marcus's voice stopped me at the doorway. Please, Camille, just wait. I turned back, looking at the man I had once loved, had once believed would protect and cherish me. He looked small now, diminished by years of deference to his mother, hollowed out by a life spent taking the path of least resistance. What do you want, Marcus? I want to apologize. He stepped forward, away from his mother's orbit, his voice stronger than I had heard it in years. For everything. For the photograph. For never standing up for you. For letting you spend 8 years in a marriage where you were treated like an interloper instead of a partner. Dolores made a sound of protest, but Marcus raised a hand to silence her. It was perhaps the first time in his life he had ever done so. Mother, please, let me say this. He turned back to me. You deserved better than what you got from us. From all of us, but especially from me. I was your husband. I should have protected you. I should have stood up to Mother, should have made it clear that treating you badly was the same as treating me badly. But I was too weak, too afraid of conflict, too comfortable with the way things had always been. I listened, weighing his words. They were true as far as they went. But truth alone did not undo the damage. Why are you telling me this now, Marcus? Because you need something from me? Or because you've genuinely changed? He had the grace to look ashamed. Both, if I'm honest. The crisis made me think about everything. About the choices I've made, about the person I've been. And I realized that I have a lot of regrets. But the biggest one is you. The way I failed you. And what exactly are you hoping I'll do with this apology? Nothing. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm trying to be honest for once in my life. He glanced at his mother, then back at me. Whatever you decide about helping the family, I wanted you to know that I'm sorry, that I know what I did was wrong, and that you were right to leave. I nodded slowly, accepting his words without offering absolution. Thank you for saying that, Marcus. It means something. Not enough to change the past, but something. Dolores could no longer contain herself. This is all very touching, but we're facing financial ruin. Can we please focus on practical matters? Practical matters. I turned to face her, letting the steel show in my voice. You want to discuss practical matters, Mrs. Carter? Fine. Let's be practical. I walked back into the room, but I did not sit. Practically speaking, your company is beyond saving. The debt structure, the failed investments, the competitive disadvantage, no amount of outside capital can fix those problems. Even if I were willing to invest, which I am not, the money would disappear into a failing enterprise and nothing would change. Gregory started to protest, but I continued. Practically speaking, you treated me with contempt for 8 years because you thought I was beneath your family. You excluded me, humiliated me, made me feel worthless, and now you're asking me to rescue you from the consequences of your own arrogance. We're asking for help? You're asking for a bailout. There's a difference. I let the words hang in the air, but here's what I am willing to do. All three Carters looked at me with sudden attention. Your company employs about 40 people. When it fails, and it will fail, those people will be out of work. They have families, bills, lives that will be disrupted by your mistakes. I'm willing to offer jobs to as many of them as are qualified to work in my clinic network. Not as a favor to you, but because those workers deserve better than to suffer for your failures. Dolores looked insulted. Gregory looked confused. Marcus, surprisingly, looked grateful. Additionally, Vanessa has mentioned interest in community health programs. If she wants to partner with me on developing cardiology services for underserved populations, I would welcome her expertise and involvement. She's a good physician and a good person, and she shouldn't be held back by family loyalty to a sinking ship. And what about us? Dolores demanded. What about the family? I looked at her, this woman who had caused me so much pain, and felt nothing but pity. I don't owe you anything, Mrs. Carter. I spent 8 years in a marriage where I was constantly reminded that I didn't belong. I left with nothing except the education I fought for and the determination to build something better. Everything I have, I earned myself. You contributed nothing to my success except motivation to escape. I picked up my purse and headed for the door. But I will say this, the family photograph that I was excluded from, the one where I wasn't considered a real Carter, I used to be hurt by that. I used to think it meant something about my worth. But now I understand. I was never meant to be in that picture. I was meant to be somewhere else entirely, building my own family, creating my own legacy. Your rejection was the best thing that ever happened to me. I walked out of the Carter mansion for the second and final time. Behind me, I heard Dolores begin to cry. It was the first time I had ever seen her show genuine emotion. But I did not turn back. Some chapters, once closed, should stay closed. The meeting with the Carters left me feeling something I hadn't expected. Emptiness. Not the empty feeling of loss, but the emptiness of completion. The sense that a long chapter of my life had finally, definitively ended. I drove home in silence, replaying the conversation in my mind. Dolores's desperation, Marcus's belated apology, Gregory's uselessness. The family that had once seemed so powerful, so intimidating, so essential to any happiness I might find. They were just people. Flawed, failing, fundamentally broken people who had never deserved the power I gave them over my self-worth. Vanessa called that evening, having heard about the meeting from Marcus. I'm sorry, she said. I'm sorry you had to go through that, and I'm sorry Mother couldn't even bring herself to apologize properly. It's not your fault, Vanessa. You were always different from them. I've spent my whole life being different from them. It's exhausting. She paused. I'm taking you up on your offer, by the way. The partnership on community cardiology. I've given my notice at the hospital. I smiled despite my fatigue. I'm glad. We'll do something important together. We will. And Camille? Thank you. For being willing to work with me even after everything my family put you through. You're not your family, Vanessa. You never were. After the call ended, I sat in my apartment and thought about family. The Carters had been my attempt to acquire something I had lost. The sense of belonging, of connection, of having people who would claim me as their own. I had married Marcus partly for love, but partly for the family that came with him. The promise of finally having a place where I belonged. Instead, I had spent 8 years being reminded that I was an outsider, an interloper, someone to be tolerated rather than embraced. The Carters had taught me that family was not something you could acquire through marriage. It was something you built, one relationship at a time, one act of love at a time. And maybe, at 38, it was time to start building. David Mitchell came into my life at a medical conference in Chicago, where I was speaking on a panel about community health innovation. He was an architect specializing in healthcare facility design, attending the conference to better understand the needs of his clients. We met at a reception, bonded over shared frustration with conference small talk, and ended up having dinner together. He was 44, widowed for 3 years after his wife lost a battle with breast cancer, raising 2 children, Maya, 12, and Jacob, 10, with the help of his mother and an endless supply of patience. He was kind in a way that felt genuine, interested in a way that didn't demand anything in return, comfortable in his own skin in a way that Marcus had never been. "You're different from the physicians I usually work with," he said over our third dinner together, in a restaurant overlooking the Atlanta skyline. "Most of them talk about their accomplishments. You talk about your patients." "My accomplishments aren't really mine," I said. "They belong to the team, to the community, to everyone who made the clinics possible. The patients are what matter, the lives we change." "See? That's what I mean." He smiled, and something in my chest loosened. "You're actually humble. It's refreshing." I had told David about my marriage early on, not wanting to hide the baggage I carried. He had listened without judgment, asked thoughtful questions, and ultimately concluded that the Carters' loss was his potential gain. "Any family that would exclude you doesn't deserve you," he said simply. "Their rejection says everything about them and nothing about you." It was what I had told myself for years. Hearing someone else say it, someone who knew me, who was choosing me, made it finally feel true. We dated for a year, taking things slowly, because we both had histories that required care. I met his children gradually, first as a friend, then as someone more permanent. Maya and Jacob had been through loss. They deserved stability, consistency, a new presence in their lives who was committed to staying. When David proposed, he did it in front of his children, making clear that he was asking all 3 of them to accept me into their family. Maya cried. Jacob asked if this meant they could call me Mom. David looked at me with an expression that held everything Marcus's expressions had always lacked. Certainty, courage, devotion without conditions. I said yes. Our wedding was small, just family and close friends, no 300 guests or imported flowers or photographers demanding formal portraits. David's mother embraced me as the daughter she'd always wanted. His children wrote me letters welcoming me into the family. Vanessa served as my maid of honor, having become the sister I'd never had. When the photographer called for the family photo, I felt a moment of instinctive tension. The ghost of that wedding 12 years ago, the memory of being excluded. But David took my hand and pulled me to the center of the group. "Right here," he said, "where you belong." His mother on one side, his children on the other, friends surrounding us. A family photo where I was not just included, but central. Where no one questioned my right to be there. Where love was not a conditional privilege, but an unconditional gift. I looked at the photographer and smiled. A real smile, unforced, radiant with the joy of finally belonging somewhere. "Everyone say family," the photographer called. "Family!" we all shouted, and the camera captured a moment that would hang on my wall for the rest of my life. The years with David and the children were a revelation of what partnership could be. Here was a man who asked my opinion and listened to my answers, who shared household responsibilities without being reminded, who defended me in small ways and large, never allowing anyone, not colleagues, not friends, not family members, to dismiss or diminish me. "You deserve to be protected," he told me once, when I expressed surprise at his fierceness on my behalf. "Not because you can't protect yourself, but because you shouldn't always have to." Maya and Jacob became my children in every way that mattered. I was there for soccer games and parent-teacher conferences, for skinned knees and broken hearts, for the 1,000 small moments that make up a childhood. They called me Mom within a year of the wedding, the word feeling like a gift each time they spoke it. I adopted them legally when Maya turned 16, making official what had been true for years. The ceremony was held in a family courtroom, with David and his mother and Vanessa watching as a judge confirmed what love had already established. "You are now legally the mother of Maya and Jacob Mitchell," the judge said. "Congratulations." Maya hugged me so hard I couldn't breathe. Jacob, trying to be tough at 13, wiped away tears he pretended weren't there. David looked at me with an expression of pure joy. We were a family. A real family, built on choice and commitment rather than blood obligation. The kind of family I had dreamed of as an orphaned teenager, lying awake in my grandmother's house and wondering if I would ever belong anywhere. The Carter family's collapse happened slowly, then all at once. The company filed for bankruptcy 18 months after my meeting with Dolores, unable to service its debts or compete in a market that had passed it by. Gregory disappeared to somewhere, rumors said Costa Rica, escaping creditors who wanted more than he could pay. Dolores was forced to sell the mansion, the country club membership, the jewelry, the cars, all the trappings of wealth that had defined her identity. I learned these details from Vanessa, who had become my partner in building a cardiology program that served thousands of patients annually. She maintained contact with her mother out of obligation, updating me occasionally on the family's deterioration. "She's living in a condo in Buckhead," Vanessa told me one day. "Nice enough, but nothing like what she's used to. Marcus helps her with expenses when he can, but he's not exactly flourishing either." "What's he doing?" "Working at a small firm downtown. Nothing like his old career. He lost a lot of his connections when the family's reputation collapsed." Vanessa shook her head. "He asked about you the other day. Wanted to know if you were happy." "What did you tell him?" "The truth. That you're happier than I've ever seen you. That you have a family who loves you, a career that matters, a life you built yourself." She smiled. He seemed genuinely pleased. "I think he's finally growing up, now that Mother doesn't have the power to keep him small." I thought about Marcus occasionally in the years that followed, wondering if he had learned anything from the family's collapse, if he had become a better person without his mother's controlling influence. I hoped he had. I bore him no ill will, just the distant affection one might feel for someone from a past life, a stranger who had once been significant. But I never reached out. That chapter was closed, and I had no desire to reopen it. The clinic network continued to grow, becoming a model for community healthcare that other cities sought to replicate. I was invited to the White House to receive an award for healthcare innovation. I was profiled in medical journals and mainstream magazines. I was asked to serve on boards and advisory committees, to shape policy and practice at the highest levels. Through it all, I remained grounded in the work that mattered, serving patients, training physicians, building systems that would outlast me. The recognition was nice, but it wasn't the point. The point was the grandmother with heart failure who could now see a cardiologist without traveling 2 hours. The point was the child with a congenital defect who got treatment before it became a crisis. The point was making the healthcare system work for people who had always been overlooked. David was my partner in everything, supporting my career while building his own, raising our children while sharing the household responsibilities, loving me through successes and setbacks with equal devotion. He never made me feel that my ambitions were a burden or my work was less important than his. He celebrated my achievements as if they were his own. "I got lucky," he said sometimes. "I found a woman who was already extraordinary. All I had to do was not mess it up." "You're being modest." "I'm being honest. You didn't need me, Camille. You had already proven you could build an amazing life on your own. I'm just grateful you let me be part of it." It was the opposite of everything I had experienced with Marcus, who had seen my growth as a threat rather than a gift. David understood that my strength made our partnership stronger, not weaker. He wasn't intimidated by my success. He was proud of it. The final piece of the Carter story came from Vanessa, who called me one evening with news I hadn't expected. "Mother passed away," she said, her voice tired. "Yesterday afternoon. Heart failure, ironically." I sat with the information, searching for an emotional response and finding only a quiet sense of completion. "I'm sorry, Vanessa. Are you okay?" I don't know. I hadn't spoken to her in months. She never forgave me for partnering with you, for choosing the outsider over the family." Those were her words. Vanessa's voice cracked. Even at the end, she couldn't let go of her grievances. "That must have been hard for you." It was, but it was also clarifying. I realized that her approval was never going to come, no matter what I did. She wasn't capable of accepting me as I was, just like she was never capable of accepting you. Vanessa paused. In a way, you taught me that. You showed me that it was possible to walk away from her expectations and build something better. I thought about Dolores Carter, the woman who had caused me so much pain, now gone from the world. I searched my heart for anger, for resentment, for the vindictive satisfaction of outliving my enemy. I found none of it. Just sadness for a woman who had never learned that love was more valuable than status, that family was more than blood, that the things she had prized most had left her dying alone and unforgiven. I hope she found peace at the end, I said finally. I hope she understood somehow that the things she valued weren't worth the price she paid. That's more generous than she deserved. Maybe, but holding on to bitterness wouldn't hurt her. It would only hurt me. Vanessa was quiet for a moment. You really have moved on, haven't you? I have. Finally and completely. And I had. The photograph from which I had been excluded no longer held any power over me. I had found my place in a different picture entirely. One where I belonged, where I was wanted, where love was not a privilege to be earned, but a gift freely given. The Carters had made a mistake when they rejected me, but their mistake had led me to exactly where I was supposed to be. The gala was held on a spring evening, the Atlanta skyline glittering through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the hotel ballroom. 500 guests had gathered to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Washington Community Health Network, the formal name for what had started as a single clinic in an underserved neighborhood and grown into a model of accessible healthcare that served communities across the Southeast. I stood at the podium, looking out at the faces before me, physicians and nurses who had joined our mission, donors who had funded our growth, community leaders who had championed our cause, and at the front table, my family. David sat beside Maya, now 24 and finishing her first year of medical residency, following in my footsteps with a determination that made me proud beyond words. Jacob, 22, had just graduated with an engineering degree and was working on healthcare technology innovations that would expand our reach even further. David's mother, now in her 80s but still sharp as ever, beamed with pride at the family she had welcomed me into. And beside her sat Vanessa, my partner in the cardiology program, my sister in every way that mattered, the one Carter who had proven that blood was not destiny. 10 years ago, I began, I opened a small clinic in a neighborhood that other healthcare systems had forgotten. I had a vision of what accessible care could look like, but I wasn't sure if anyone would share that vision with me. I paused, letting my gaze travel across the room. What I discovered was that the hunger for change was everywhere. Physicians who wanted to serve communities rather than corporations. Donors who believed that healthcare was a right, not a privilege. Patients who had been waiting their entire lives for someone to see them, really see them, and treat them with the dignity they deserved. I thought about the journey that had led me here. The orphaned girl who had married into a family that rejected her. The medical student who had studied through the night while her marriage crumbled. The divorced woman who had rebuilt herself from nothing. The physician who had turned her pain into purpose. I want to thank everyone who made this work possible. The staff who work impossible hours for inadequate pay because they believe in what we're doing. The donors whose generosity keeps our doors open. The community members who trusted us with their health when they had every reason to be suspicious of healthcare systems that had failed them before. I looked at my family, feeling their love like warmth on my skin. And I want to thank my family. My husband, David, who supports everything I do with grace and patience. My children, Maya and Jacob, who inspire me every day to be better. My mother-in-law, Grace, who welcomed me into her family when another family had rejected me. And my sister, Vanessa, who proved that family is about choice, not just blood. Vanessa wiped tears from her eyes. David nodded, his expression radiant with pride. 10 years ago, I wasn't sure I would ever have a family of my own. I had been told, in ways both subtle and overt, that I didn't belong, that I was an outsider, an interloper, someone to be tolerated rather than embraced. I took a breath, deciding to tell the full story for the first time in a public setting. At my first wedding, my mother-in-law excluded me from the family photograph. She told me to wait by the buffet table while the real family posed together. And my husband, my brand new husband, said nothing. He let it happen. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Some people knew the outlines of my story. Few knew the specific details. That moment nearly broke me. I had married into that family hoping to find the belonging I had lost when my parents died. Instead, I found rejection, humiliation, the constant reminder that I would never be good enough. I smiled, the expression coming easily now. But here's what I've learned. The people who reject you are not the arbiters of your worth. The families that exclude you are not the only families available. When one door closes, even when it's slammed in your face, another door opens. Sometimes you have to build that door yourself, but it's there, waiting for you. I gestured to the room around me. This network is the door I built. These clinics, these staff members, these patients who trust us with their lives, they are my proof that rejection is not destiny. That being told you don't belong in one place means you're free to find the places where you do belong. I looked directly at my family. And these people, my husband, my children, my sister of the heart, they are my true family. They don't tolerate me. They celebrate me. They don't exclude me from photographs. They put me at the center. I raised my glass. So here's to 10 years of building something that matters. Here's to everyone who helped make it possible. And here's to the lesson I learned from being kicked out of a family photo. Belonging is not about being accepted by people who don't value you. It's about finding people who do. The applause that followed was thunderous. I stepped away from the podium and was immediately surrounded by David and the children, by Vanessa and Grace, by friends and colleagues who had become family over the years. That was beautiful, David whispered in my ear. I'm so proud of you. I'm proud of us, I said. All of us. The photographer called for a group photo, the family and close friends shot that would commemorate the evening. We gathered together, arranging ourselves for the camera. David and I at the center, Maya and Jacob on either side, Grace and Vanessa behind us, close friends filling in the frame. Everyone smile, the photographer called. I smiled, the expression genuine, uncomplicated, free of the shadows that had once darkened such moments. This was my family photograph. This was where I belonged. This was the life I had built from the ashes of rejection. And it was worth everything I had gone through to get here. The evening wound down slowly, guests departing in waves, conversations trailing off as the hour grew late. David and I were among the last to leave, lingering with Maya and Jacob and Vanessa, reluctant to let go of a moment that had felt so perfect. I have something for you, Vanessa said, pulling an envelope from her purse. I found it when I was going through Mother's things after she passed. I wasn't sure whether to give it to you, but after tonight's speech, I think you should have it. I opened the envelope and found a photograph. The photograph. The Carter family portrait from my wedding day, the one I had been excluded from. Dolores at the center, flanked by her children and extended family, smiling with the satisfaction of someone who had protected her dynasty from an intruder. On the back, in Dolores's handwriting, was a single sentence: the real Carter family. I stared at the photograph for a long moment, at the faces of people who had made me feel worthless, at the woman who had spent years trying to break me. Then I handed it back to Vanessa. You should have this, I said. I don't need it anymore. Are you sure? I'm positive. That photograph represents a version of family that never included me and never should have. I have my own photographs now, my own family, my own life. Vanessa hugged me, the photograph awkward between us, and whispered, You won, you know. Not by taking anything from them, but by building something they could never touch. That's the best kind of victory. I thought about her words as David drove us home, as I kissed the children goodnight, as I lay beside my husband in the dark. Victory wasn't about proving the Carters wrong. It wasn't about watching them fail while I succeeded. It wasn't even about the apology I had never received from Dolores, the acknowledgement she had been incapable of giving. Victory was this life, this family, this sense of belonging that no one could take away because I had built it myself. one choice at a time, one act of love at a time. The spineless husband who had let his mother kick me out of the wedding photo had made a mistake, but the mistake was his, not mine. And the consequences, the beautiful, unexpected, life-changing consequences, had all been in my favor. I closed my eyes and slept, surrounded by love, finally at home. 5 years after the gala, I retired from active clinical practice. Not from work entirely, I continued to serve on boards, advise other health systems, mentor the next generation of community-focused physicians, but from the daily demands of patient care. It was time to let younger physicians take the lead, while I focused on ensuring the network's long-term sustainability. David retired around the same time, and we spent our newfound freedom traveling, visiting healthcare facilities in other countries, learning how different cultures approach the challenges of accessible medicine. We went to Rwanda and saw community health worker programs that put our American systems to shame. We went to Japan and marveled at preventive care models that kept patients healthy rather than just treating them when they became sick. We went to Brazil and witnessed the challenges and triumphs of universal healthcare in action. Each trip enriched our understanding and renewed our commitment to the work that had defined my career. We returned with ideas, with connections, with a global perspective that would inform the network's future direction. Maya completed her residency and joined the network as a cardiologist, the second generation of physicians in our family dedicated to community service. She brought fresh energy and new ideas, pushing us to embrace innovations that I was sometimes too cautious to pursue. Jacob, meanwhile, developed technology platforms that connected our clinics to specialists around the world, enabling telemedicine consultations that extended our reach to patients who couldn't travel. "You raised them well," David's mother Grace told me one Sunday afternoon, watching her grandchildren interact with their cousins at a family barbecue. "They're good people, kind and ambitious and committed to making the world better." "I had help," I said. "A lot of help." "You had love. That's what makes the difference." I thought about love, the presence and absence of it, the way it shaped lives and possibilities. My first marriage had been marked by the absence of love, by the substitution of control and contempt for genuine connection. My second marriage was built on love so steady and sustaining that I sometimes forgot it wasn't always there, forgot there had been a time when I doubted anyone would ever truly see and value me. The Carters had taught me what love was not. David and the children had taught me what it was. Both lessons were essential. I could not have recognized the real thing without experiencing the counterfeit. On my 70th birthday, my family threw a party. Not a gala or a formal event, just an afternoon gathering in our backyard with the people who mattered most. Maya and Jacob with their spouses and children, my grandchildren, a word that still filled me with wonder. Vanessa with her partner, having finally found her own happiness after years of prioritizing family obligations. Friends from every chapter of my life, including some who had known me as a young nurse falling in love with the wrong man. David gave a toast that made everyone cry, speaking of the partnership we had built, the life we had created, the joy he still felt waking up beside me after nearly 30 years of marriage. Then Maya stepped forward with a gift, a photo album she had compiled, documenting my journey from medical student to retired physician, from rejected bride to beloved matriarch. "I wanted you to see how far you've come," she said. "Sometimes we're so focused on moving forward that we forget to look back at the path we've traveled." I paged through the album slowly, seeing myself change and grow across decades of photographs. There I was as a young medical student, exhausted but determined. There I was at the opening of the first clinic, hopeful and nervous. There I was at award ceremonies and conferences, increasingly confident in my role. There I was at Maya and Jacob's milestones, graduations, weddings, the births of their children, present and participating, included rather than excluded. And there, on the final page, was a photograph taken at the gala 5 years earlier, the family portrait that had served as the counterpoint to everything the Carters had denied me. David and I at the center, surrounded by children and friends and chosen family, all of us smiling with the genuine joy of people who belong together. "This is what you built, Mom," Maya said. "This is your legacy. Not just the clinics and the programs and the patients you helped, though those matter too. This family, this love, this proof that being rejected doesn't mean you're unworthy." I pulled her into a hug, this daughter of my heart who had grown into a woman I admired as much as I loved. "Thank you," I whispered, "for reminding me." Later that evening, after the guests had gone and the grandchildren had been taken home, I sat with David on our back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. "Big milestone," he said. 70 years. How does it feel?" "Like I'm just getting started," I said, and meant it. Like there's still so much to do, so much to experience, so much love to give and receive. That's what I love about you. You're always looking forward. Because looking back used to hurt too much. But now, I considered how to express what I meant. Now the past doesn't hurt anymore. It's just part of the story. The chapter that led to the chapter I'm living now. David took my hand, his fingers intertwining with mine. "I never asked you this," he said slowly. "But do you ever think about the wedding photo, the one you were excluded from?" "Sometimes, less and less over the years." I smiled. It used to be a wound. Then it became a scar. Now it's just a fact. Something that happened to someone I used to be. And if you could go back and change it, make him stand up for you, include you in the picture? I thought about the question seriously, considering the ripple effects of that hypothetical change. If Marcus had defended me, would I have stayed in the marriage longer? Would I have deferred medical school, remained in his shadow, never discovered what I was capable of on my own? "No," I said finally. "I wouldn't change it, because if that hadn't happened, I might not be here now. With you, with our family, with this life." David squeezed my hand. "His loss, my gain. Our gain," I corrected. "We built this together." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the last light fade from the sky. Somewhere in the house, I could hear the distant sounds of family members getting ready to leave. Car keys jingling, goodbyes being exchanged, the normal chaos of a life filled with people who loved each other. This was the family photograph that mattered. Not a single image frozen in time, but the ongoing reality of connection and commitment. A photograph that was being taken every day, in every moment of presence and love. I had been excluded from the Carter's picture, but I had built something so much better. And that, I finally understood, was the real victory.